So yeah, number 5 here we've got ir u vayet, and so the question is, well, doesn't vayet always have this dagesh? It's the first letter of the word. Remember, well, I guess I shouldn't say remember because Futato doesn't really cover this. He covers how to tell when a dagesh is strong or weak. That is, when is it strictly a bagad kafat dagesh, that's the weak dagesh, versus when is it the doubling dagesh that might also appear in a bagad kafat letter. And the rule there was, if the dagesh is preceded by a vowel sound, then the dagesh is strong because it can kind of hold up two vowels. It's strong enough to hold two vowels, both the vowel before it and the vowel after it. But if it's preceded by a consonant sound, that is, usually if it's preceded by a silent shavah, then it would be the weak dagesh, the bagad kufat dagesh. Let's just instead walk through it this way. We're going to talk about how the bagad kufat letters operate. So we talked initially about how dagesh operates and how to tell whether dagesh was strong or weak. What we're going to talk about now is not dagesh. We're going to talk about the bagad kafat letter. When does the bagad kafat letter have the dagesh and when does it lack the dagesh? So these are two different things. The rules are going to be different. It's not going to be the same as if it's preceded by a vowel, it had whatever. Okay, so this is how the bagad kafat works. If the bagad kafat letter, and we're only talking about beit, gimel, dalet, pei, up, kaf. Okay, I got to use the mnemonic, I guess. Beit, gimel, dalet, kaf, pei, tav. Those are the only letters we're talking about. If that letter is preceded by a vowel sound, it will not have the weak dagesh. If it's preceded by a vowel sound, it will not have the weak dagesh. That kind of connects with the rule on dagesh that if the dagesh is preceded by a vowel sound, it will not be the weak dagesh, it will be the strong dagesh. So that's the touch point that you need to remember. If a bagad kafat letter is preceded by a vowel sound, it will not have the weak dagesh. But if the bagad kafat, so in that case, the only time a bagad kafat letter is going to have a dagesh with a vowel preceding it immediately is if it's a strong dagesh, the doubling dagesh. That's the only kind of dagesh that can stand between a vowel sound before the bagad kafat letter and a vowel sound after. The weak dagesh cannot stand between those two. The weak dagesh needs that consonantal. You can think of it as a silent shavah, even though, like for example, here in let's go to lave. Okay, so for lave, we don't put the silent shavah under the bait because we don't need it there at the end of a word. But you could still put a silent shavah here because the silent shavah just marks the end of a syllable. And so if you think of a silent shavah underneath the end of every syllable, or I should say a silent shavah under every closed, the letter that closes a syllable, then what you'll kind of get as far as a trend goes is the bagad kafat letters only have the dagesh lene, the weak dagesh, if they are preceded by a consonantal sound. Usually that will be within a word. They'll be preceded by the silent shavah. But there are also times where, let's see if we can find, let me just pull up the Hebrew text and we'll go for a stroll. So just going through here, this happens to be Psalm 19. I'm just going to look for a word that begins with a, okay, so here we've got a dagesh in the initial kaf, but that makes sense because it's preceded by the consonantal mem. All right, and so initial bagad kafat letters still going through here. Dalet. All right, now dalet is a little bit tricky here. Does the hey here count as a consonant or not? We'll skip that controversial conversation. Let's go here again. We've got dalet. Dalet has the dagesh. It's preceded by a consonantal sound. Beit has the dagesh, preceded by a consonantal sound. Here, beit has the dagesh, preceded by a consonantal sound. And let's keep going until we get to an example like in our practice. Here, we've got beit. It's not initial, but it's not preceded by a consonantal sound. It's preceded by a vowel sound. Same for here. Tevel. This beit is preceded by the vowel sere. And here we've got bahem. That's preceded by the consonant of the lamed. So what you'll get used to is these bagad kafat letters, if they're preceded by a consonantal sound, they're going to have the weak dagesh. If they're preceded by a vocalic sound, a vowel sound, they're going to have either nothing, no dagesh at all, or they may have a strong dagesh for some other reason. This is an unusual one here with the ayin closing this. Remember, ayin can't actually close a syllable, so this wouldn't have to be, or I'm sorry, this wouldn't have to be here. I'm not sure why they point it that way, but you can see some inconsistencies in that general rule if you look at enough examples. But by and large, 90% of the time, 90-95% of the time, you can predict whether a letter should have a dagesh by whether or not it's preceded by a consonantal sound or a vowel sound. Another way to look at it is if a bagad kafat letter immediately follows an open syllable, that's not a good way to look at it because a bagad kafat letter might close a syllable. I would stick with the vowel consonant dichotomy. If a bagad kafat letter is preceded immediately by a consonant, or silent shavah, it's going to have a dagesh lene. If it's immediately preceded by a vowel sound, it will not have a dogish lene. It will not have the weak dogish. Other reasons may cause it to have, for example, here, this bait is preceded by the vowel. Well, why the heck does it have a dogish then? Well, because this is not a weak dogish. This is a strong dogish. This is the doubling dogish. Any other examples of a begad kafat? Here again, we've got taku fato. The pei here is preceded by the vowel shurik. The tav here preceded by the vowel shurik. And here we've got kitsotam. The tav here preceded by the holam vav vowel. And here we've got the tav with a dagesh, but because this is a silent shava, and we know it's a silent shava because this is a short vowel, that means that the tav here is preceded by the consonantal samic, and that's why it has a dagesh lene here. So those rules about the whether it's a weak dagesh or a strong dagesh connect with the begad kafat rules in that a begad kafat letter immediately preceded by a vowel sound cannot have a weak dagesh, usually. Will not have a weak dagesh, usually. We can't say it can't have any dagesh because it can have a strong dagesh. I'll probably put together maybe a chart of that because I'm saying a lot of words and it gets confusing keeping that all organized in your head. But the basic question to ask when you get to a begad kafat letter is, and this is why Futato doesn't cover it, because from your perspective, if you had to compose Hebrew, you would have to know whether or not to put the dagesh there. But you don't have to compose Hebrew, so you don't need to know the rule that tells you whether or not a dagesh will appear. You just need to know the rule that tells you which kind of dagesh you see. And so that's why he gives you the rule, if it's preceded by a vowel and followed a vowel, that's going to be the dagesh forte, the doubling dagesh. But the general rule for a begad kafat letter is, if it's preceded by a consonantal sound, it will have the weak dagesh. If it's preceded by a vowel sound, it will not have the weak dagesh. Does that make sense?
Yep. Futato was kind of, well, I wrote down three things. So if it begins a word, it's weak, which kind of makes sense in English because you'd never have like say two Ds in a row at the start of an English word either. After a vowel, it's strong. That kind of makes sense from English as well because I can't, like puddle. No, it's only got one D in it.
No, puddle's got two.
What am I doing? Down in Australia, we spell things funny. No, but so after a vowel makes sense for a strong dagesh, and after if it's not a vowel, it's a consonant, it logically doesn't make sense either. So there is some logic there. But with the vav conjunction kind of threw me because I was kind of looking at it as a kind of a prefix rather than changing the word. So adding that what that's called, holam vav.
The shurik.
Shurik. Yeah, I'll get it right eventually. It literally changed the word, not operated as a prefix. And that's what threw me, because I'm saying, I don't know what this word is. I've never seen this before.
Yeah, and the reason, again, why it shifts to a shurik instead of the vav, shava, or vav, some other vowel, has to do with a linguistic concept called euphony. And euphony is a principle that basically says that languages tend to make changes that make words easier to say. So as a language develops, the changes are going to tend toward the direction of things being easier, things being more simplified, that sort of idea. And because of the shape that the mouth has to make when it makes a labial like b, m, or p, because of that, because those are labials, the oo is a good sound to go with that, because the oo actually pushes your lips out anyways. So the oo, boo, moo, poo, that sort of thing, that's how the shurik gets associated with the bait, mem, and pei. It has nothing to do with Hebrew grammar or Hebrew anything. It's just simple linguistics. It's easier to make the b, p, and m sound if your lips are already out there. Whereas if you were to say, think of a p word, pne, I guess. The pne is harder to say than oofne. And so that's kind of where it comes from is, again, I can't point to a time historically when, before this shift occurred, it may not have ever shifted. Hebrew may have just started out with this oo for the bump letters, but that's the idea. And we call it the bump rule because it includes the three consonants that it applies to, and it also includes the oo sound, bump. And so that's kind of how we remember it. But anytime you have the vav conjunction, and it is getting attached to a bait, a mem, or a pei, that vav conjunction will just shift to a shurik. And that is also the one exception, you may not remember, but when we were first learning the syllables, there was a syllable rule that said every syllable has to start with a consonant. There's one exception to that for the most part, and that is the shurik vav conjunction. Shurik vav conjunction is its own syllable. So when we see umelech, we would syllabify this u-me-lech. When we see uvayet, we would syllabify this as u-vayet. And so that's kind of the, sorry, I'm trying to get the highlight off of here. There we go. By syllabifying it off by itself, it doesn't mess up our, it's not like, I mean, to be honest, this is the reason why why the definite article comes with a dogish forte, because it doesn't want to screw up the syllabification of the words by adding another syllable to the beginning. So it makes sure what that dogish forte does is it closes that initial syllable so that you don't have a bunch of vowel changes after that. But anyways, that's a lot of technical information. The idea here, basically, what you're talking about is if a Begad Kafat letter is preceded by a vowel sound, then it most likely will not have its dogish lene there.
And that's all that's all we really need to remember. Like if we see that vav conjunction, take note there may have been a strong dagesh there originally.
Yeah, and you need to be flexible with your vocabulary, especially when a vocabulary word begins with a Begad Kafat letter. Don't program that dagesh into your brain as a necessary part of that word. The only necessary part of that word are the root letters. So, for example, kohen, you want to have in your brain kaf, he, nun. Now, remembering that the lexical form, the masculine singular absolute form, has a holum and a sere is going to be helpful, but you don't need to remember whether it starts with a dagesh or not, because any Begad Kafat letter that begins a word will start with a dagesh if it's not preceded by a vowel sound, is the idea. So this dagesh will pop in and out depending on the context. So you want to be able to recognize bot even if it doesn't have the dagesh. You want to be able to recognize bane even if it doesn't have the dagesh. That's important. Anything else?
I've got a couple other quick questions, but you other guys, you got any questions rather than me just hogging the microphone?
I did have one that was not as serious as that, probably a quicker answer, but in the exercise you have pulled up, number 3 and number 6, I noticed that the book and the answers, it translated number 3 as priest and prophet, and then number 6 was a priest and king and a king. The indefinite article there, is there any kind of rule as to why one would have it and the other would not?
Yeah, I think actually I got this same question. I'm checking because if so, I'll be able to knock it out here as well. 5 and 6. Okay, it is 6, but this is 5 and 6 versus 3 and 6. The answer key uses the indefinite article, but none of the other answers have this, even though they could. Is there a reason for this? Okay. So basically what's going on here is, no, there is no rule other than this. This is the rule. Because what's changing here isn't the Hebrew, right? The Hebrew is the same. I mean, I don't mean literally like same letters, but the grammar of the Hebrew is the same. In number 3, you've got a masculine singular noun. Well, obviously same word. And then venavi, you've got the conjunction plus a masculine singular noun. Umelech, you've got a conjunction plus a masculine singular noun. So the Hebrew grammar is the same. There's nothing in the Hebrew spelling or anything like that that hints you as to whether or not you would use the English word a. That's because whether or not you use the English word a in either of these comes down to rules of English rather than rules of Hebrew. This has nothing to do with Hebrew, the way that we end up translating this. So if you translate number 3 as priest and prophet, or priest and a prophet, or a priest and a prophet, or a priest and prophet, there's 4 different combinations of whether or not to use the indefinite article in English. Use it for both, use it for neither, use it for kohen, but not navi, use it for navi, but not kohen. All kinds of options there. The correct one, so to speak, is the one that makes the most sense in English, the one that most accurately reflects what the Hebrew is trying to say. So in English, if I were to say a priest and prophet, that could make sense in the following context. He was a priest and prophet. That kind of works. I don't know whether or not it's any better than he was a priest and a prophet, but I think both of those could work. If I were to say priest and a prophet, I am priest and a prophet, or I see priest and a prophet, I can't think of an English context where it makes sense to not have the indefinite article on priest, but then to add it on prophet. That doesn't make any sense at all to me. So that would never be correct, to start with no indefinite article and then add the indefinite article here. I think the most commonly used structure in English would be to have the indefinite article on both, a priest and a prophet. After that would probably be priest and prophet. So unfortunately, we need to talk a little bit about English grammar and meaning. I don't want to bog down on English, but the fact of the matter is we have to translate into English, so we have to know a little bit about English. So when we use the indefinite article in English, you know what? No, I don't want to waste time on that. There are.
Did I open up something I shouldn't have?
No. This is a really important question, but it's not a Hebrew question. Is the problem? And I think it's worth talking about because you're not just learning Hebrew; you're learning how to translate Hebrew into English. So you need to know something about English. This is something generally you would learn in second year, but it's not like it's going to be in a grammar that you're always. So it's important to talk about. So let me think for one sip, and then I'll try to explain what's going on here.
One of the problems is they're not complete sentences. Priest and prophet isn't a sentence. It's a bunch of words.
That is a problem because the additional context of a full sentence will help you eliminate certain possibilities. I would say the only one that really I don't think would ever make sense of those 4 possibilities would be priest and a prophet. I just don't think that makes sense in English. I think the best one is a priest and a prophet. Next best would be a priest. I'm sorry, I don't know. Maybe priest and prophet and a priest and prophet. Maybe those are tied, but I think clearly the best one is a priest and a prophet. But what difference does it make? What is the difference between saying he spoke to a priest and a prophet? Let's write that down. All right, so option 1 would be something like he spoke to a priest and a prophet. That means something. Number 2, he spoke to a priest and prophet. That might have a slightly different meaning. Number 3, he spoke to priest and prophet. That definitely has a different meaning. And then this weird one that I don't think makes any sense. He spoke to priest and a prophet. All right, so I'm just going to take this one, and I'm going to strike through it because I think that's silly. All right, number 1, he spoke to a priest and a prophet. If you picture what this sentence is describing, chances are you're going to see a male speaking to 2 people. He's speaking to one priest and he's speaking to one prophet. He spoke to a priest and a prophet. We might make that a little clearer by saying he spoke to a priest and to a prophet. But even if we did that, either way, this one clearly allows for one person speaking to 2 people. Just keep these a little distinct. Number 2, if you picture what's going on here, he spoke to a priest and prophet. I picture this as one person speaking to one person who is both a priest and a prophet. That's what I picture in number 2. So that's the slight difference in connotation. Number 3, he spoke to priest and prophet. I see one person speaking to 2 types of people. This is an important difference. When we lack the article in English, when we lack both the definite and indefinite article, the word tends to take on a qualitative meaning. It tends to refer to a type of thing rather than I don't even want to say a specific thing. What the definite article does the definite article refers to a specific instance of the noun. The indefinite article, again, this is all English, the indefinite article refers to a general instance of the noun. So it could be any. He spoke to a priest and prophet. If I said he spoke to the priest and prophet, or the priest and the prophet, those are specific priests and prophets. They're the priest and the specific ones. If I say he spoke to a priest and he spoke to a prophet, generally speaking, whoever he spoke to happened to be a priest and a prophet. These are general instances of the noun. But when you lack both, the lack of article doesn't refer, indicates, I guess, indicates indicates a reference to a type or quality or category, okay? So while the indefinite article may not be specific, it is particular. There is one person here, a priest and prophet, or a priest and a prophet. These are one particular person, but they're not a specific person. Oh, I hope that makes sense. They are one instantiation. They are one instance of a priest. But when we talk about he spoke to priest and prophet, this is not an instance of a priest. This is the category of priest. He spoke to priest people and he spoke to prophet people, priest type people and prophet type people. If I delete all of this, does what I have here make sense? This distinction between he spoke to a priest and a prophet, that's probably one person speaking to 2 people. He spoke to a priest and prophet, that seems to be one person who is both a priest and a prophet. And then he spoke to priest and prophet. This is not necessarily just one person, it's one type of person. He spoke to the priest type and he spoke to the prophet type. Does that make sense at all?
Absolutely.
Okay. And if
yeah.
not, if it doesn't, you don't really have to worry about it because it's not stuff you're going to have to worry about regularly. But the problem is this is relatively, I mean, advanced English linguist. I mean, I guess linguistics isn't the right word, but this is something that we intuit more than what we think about. Like we intuitively might be able to pick up on the differences here, but it's a lot harder to explain them than it is to just sort of sense them. So, anyways, go
I
ahead.
got it. It seems to me like in number one that we're maybe missing the preposition at the second point, or at least applying the two to both of those. And I guess in Hebrew, would it be that? And I'm sorry, your word.
Yeah, I was over here. Okay.
No problem. And in Hebrew, would we be supplied like the lamed sva with that to make the one person speaking to two people?
Yeah.
He spoke to a priest and to a prophet.
It's a good question. Generally speaking, in English, and I should say this is in what is the word? I don't want to say proper English, but conventional English. What is the word for? I guess proper English. That's not the word I'm trying to think of, but
Conventional.
yeah, there's another word that I'm trying to think of that's like there are all of these words that we use and the ways that we speak, and I shouldn't say these words. There's all these ways of saying something. There's a proper way or an accepted way, and then there's more of a colloquial way or something like that. I can't think of what that word is for like. Yeah, it's the opposite of idiomatic or colloquial. Anyways, the idea being, if we're going to follow the rules, quote unquote, of good English, one of those rules is being concise. And the guideline of being concise would say he spoke to a priest and a prophet, and to a prophet. Look, if I turn Grammarly on here, I think it's going to have a problem with this. Yes, okay. So it's saying remove this preposition. You don't need it. This preposition can govern both of them. You would only add another preposition if the preposition needs to change. So Grammarly says, get rid of that. You don't want that. This, oops, there we go. Yeah, it appears that the preposition to is redundant. So if you get rid of it, he spoke to a priest and a prophet, it would mean the same thing according to Grammarly. The problem is there are situations and contexts where you include this repeated pronoun not because it changes the meaning, but because it eliminates ambiguity. Like you could read the sentence in two ways if that preposition were gone in some circumstances, and so you would include it for the sake of clarity. It's kind of like putting a comma here, okay? This is not proper English grammar to put a comma here, but I might put a comma here if I wanted to imply a pause that wasn't grammatical. It was just, I want to say rhetorical, but that's not right. He spoke to a priest and to a prophet. That would be an appropriate use of a comma here, even though it's not grammatically required. Okay, I think the preposition to, the repetition of this preposition is a similar thing. So whether you include that preposition or not in your English doesn't really change the meaning of the sentence, or at least it shouldn't. If you ask the question, what about in Hebrew? Would Hebrew repeat the lamed preposition there? That's a really good question, because I would say no, but something very interesting happens in Genesis 1:1. Now, this is not a preposition. This is the definite direct object marker. But in Genesis 1:1, we have the bait preposition. It's on this word reshit. Reshit means beginning. So at beginning or in beginning. Bara, this is the verb created. It's Cal Perfect 3MS. If you're wondering why it's a kametz instead of a patak, it has to do with the fact that the aleph is unable to close the syllable, and Hebrew wants an open accented syllable to be long, so this lengthens to the kametz. Bara, Elohim, God. So God created, and then we have our definite direct object marker. But what's really interesting here is we have a compound subject. We have he created the heavens and the earth. But the 8 appears for both of them. It's not 8 hashamayim the haaretz. It's 8 hashamayim the 8 haaretz, which is really fascinating to me. If this were a preposition, you could ask the question, would that preposition get repeated? And I don't know if it would or not. But the reason why I point this out is because I'm realizing as I'm speaking, this is a really stupid example because we don't have a definite direct object marker in English. But I want to say, like, English wouldn't do this. This would be redundant in English to reuse this marker. But we don't use a marker anyways, so it's kind of a bad example. But all that to say, what might be redundant in one language is not redundant in another. And here I just thought of the perfect example of that. Have you guys learned the preposition bane yet? Between? Okay. So there's the word son, which is bane, but there's also a preposition bane. And here's an example about how Hebrew is going to do something that to us feels redundant because we don't do this in English. But in verse 6, it says, God said, we translate this variously either as let an expanse or let a firmament be, let there be a firmament, batok hamaim. So batok is like within, in the midst of the waters, and mavdil. Mavdil. What is mavdil? Separate. Okay. So this is a participle. And let it separate Bain Mayim, between water. Oh, that's not right. This is the wrong verse. I'm trying to figure out where the Vabain. Bain Vabain. Here we go. This is it. Verse 7. Sorry. So God made the expanse and separated between the water which min tachat, which was from above the expanse, and Bain Hamam. So he made the expanse and separated between the water which was above the expanse and between the water which was below. To us, that's two different separations. Separating between the water above and between the water below. That's not what it means, though. It means separating between the water above and the water below. But it reuses this preposition. I'll tell you right now, guys, if this weren't live, if this were me just trying to explain something, this would be cut out. I don't know if this makes any sense to you at all. I'm trying to show you, though, that this preposition would be redundant in English, and that's just one of the things you have to keep in mind, that Hebrew may structure something a certain way, but translating it into how English would say it, that's that whole second stage. And so when you get over here and you've got Kohen V'melech, it's pretty simple what that means in Hebrew, but in English now I have choices in how to render that meaning. I can say a priest and king, I can say a priest and a king, I can say priest and a king, or I can say priest and king. And which one I choose is, again, going to depend on context. All that to say, those four answers, or those four kind of combinations of the indefinite article in English, the word a in English, would all be acceptable for each of these. There's no reason to translate. I'd have to, let me see what his answers are here. Is this in lesson 9? Yeah.
Yeah, and in number 3, he says priest and prophet, and in number 6, it's a priest and a king.
Yeah, there's absolutely no, that's so irritating to me.
Agreed.
There's absolutely no reason to change that, especially from a Hebrew perspective. If he's going to change it, he should put a note here saying that he's just illustrating that there are two possibilities. So he should say priest and prophet, or a priest and a prophet, priest and king, or a priest and a king, instead of mixing it up like that. Anyway.
Maybe he's simply trying to say it's either way is good as long as it's consistent. Like you said, a priest and a prophet, or priest and prophet, but just kind of leave it at that.
Yeah, and he would, in that sense, if what you're saying is true, he would then say something like, but don't say a priest and king. Either use the article for both or use it for neither, is what you're saying, right? The problem is you could use it for one and not the other in English, depending. And that's sort of the... We talked with the negative particle about how seeing what word the negative particle occurs before gives you an insight into the Hebrew meaning that you wouldn't be able to see in English. This is sort of the reverse. English is actually more specific in this instance with the indefinite article than Hebrew is. And so if you were translating from English to Hebrew, you would actually get more ambiguous going to Hebrew than you would in English. But that's just an interesting coincidence. So anyways, I'm sure I've more than answered your question, Todd, but part of the problem is I don't have good self-control on chasing down rabbit trails that I find interesting. When I haven't thought them through in my head, it comes out like blah, 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 blah. And so, like I said, I would, at this point, delete everything I've said and then try to summarize in one or two sentences. But we're just going to move on from that.
No problem. I've been waiting for 2 days to do the same thing. I do the same thing. I've wanted to know why. And so.
Yeah, no, but that's a great question, because this, to me, would be very confusing looking at, why here and not there. So. Any other questions?
You do a good job of letting us know what's vital to know for what we're learning and what's going to be an exam versus this is interesting. So I commend you for, I'm not freaking out about stuff that's not going to be on the exam.
Yeah, and like I said, when I add, when I add extra resources or I add extra videos with explanations, the whole idea there is to try to clarify. So if it just makes it more confusing, just ignore it, because it won't be something you need to know. All right.
Kristen, did you have any questions? I got another couple of quick ones, but Todd also said that his was going to be quick. So
that's not Todd's fault. That's my fault.
I just had a quick question about when we do translations of sentences, if we get close to it, but it's not exactly what is on the, like in the book answer or whatever, is that good, or do we need to try and get it as close? I think
it's certainly good. And I wouldn't say you necessarily need to get it as close to the book as possible. When you're on the answer to this question might be different depending on whether you're talking about in your homework or on the quiz. So if you're talking about in your homework, it might make sense to get as close as possible so that you can make sure you understand the concept he's trying to communicate. But on the quizzes, if what you've written is a legitimate translation of the Hebrew sentence, I'm not going to mark points off just because you worded it differently than, a really, let me see if I can find an example of this while I'm talking in a recent quiz, but let me pull up these last two translations that were on last week's quiz. Were there not translations on last week's quiz?
The very last two.
Right. I went all the way down. Let me go back all the way up now. Maybe I just skipped over them. Parsing, vocab. Maybe it shuffled them in the middle. Okay, here we go. Yes, here they are. These are the two. So here you've got, this would mean the mother sent a priest. There's not a lot of wiggle room there. It's pretty straightforward. You would need to say the mother because it's definite. You would need to say sent. It probably would not be good to say the mother sent priest because that's not good English. Like we just wouldn't say that in English. We wouldn't say the mother sent priest. If it were a non-count noun like the mother sent food, you wouldn't need to say the mother sent a food. But this is a count noun, so you would need the article here unless you're talking about a category in which the mother sent priest type. Nah, it just doesn't really work in English. The second one, the priest heard. Okay, so for example, the word devar can mean message, it can mean word, it can mean matter or issue. So obviously any translation of devar that's reasonable, even if it doesn't show up in the answer key, I would accept. We're so early in the translations that there's not a lot of wiggle room here, but as we get toward the end of the semester, and certainly in second semester, there's going to be all kinds of translations where you'll be able to, there's just options when it comes to how to render it in English. And so as long as it's a legitimate option, you'll get full credit for it. I would say at this point, because we're so early, it probably does make sense. Here's the way to do it. If your answer is different than what's in the book and you're not sure why, email me. That way I can explain whether or not what you've got is acceptable, like is a valid translation, or if you're missing something. Because I think actually we probably did have someone in one of the classes who translated this sentence as the mother sent priest, and I took a point off for that because that's not proper. That's not an English sentence, and your English translations, unfortunately, they have to be English sentences to be English translations. So that's sort of the general rule, I guess. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that's good. Yeah,
okay.
Thank you.
But yeah, never hesitate to send me a question about, hey, I got this, the book says that, what's the difference? Does it matter? Or, am I missing something? All right. Grant, anything else?
Yeah, I got a couple of quickies. Hey, there was something on when you were buzzing through. It looked like there was one question that like almost everyone got wrong, but don't worry about that. I was just being nosy.
Well, now I'm curious.
I saw a particularly long black line.
That's probably the best way for me to look for it then.
There we go. It's just up a bit.
Oh, it's up further?
No, I think down again. That doesn't matter. It's not important.
Well, now I'm going to find it. Okay, if it's this one, it's just that people put something besides these. And on the verbs, it's real tricky because a lot of people will just put sacrifice. Well, I've told you I'm going to accept that on these verbs because of the way that Futato does it. So that's probably one of these, verbs that I'm pretty lenient on what I accept there. It didn't match the answer in the quiz answer key, but I'll usually still count those right. I will say this. A lot of people get people, and eam, the preposition with, get those mixed up. If it helps, eam has an I class vowel, the heroic, and with has an I in it. So that's one way that I kind of keep those separate. Eam is with, is people. I can't remember of any others that a lot of people had trouble with. But
I actually found was really easy because is part of Adam, which is humanity, mankind. So people does actually a no-brainer.
Yeah, that's a good memory aid there.
While you're flicking through, I'll quickly throw out my other couple of questions. So we have Bert, or like ba, meaning in, with, at, but we also have, where is it? Im, strangely enough, which is with. So im meaning with is like a complement sort of thing. Like I always thought that with like I'm with him or something like that. Im. But then what does the with?
You're muted.
Sorry.
It's okay. Yeah, how is the bait preposition, which we sometimes translate as with, different from im, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so the basic idea, and this is actually one that does have an answer. Unfortunately, you're going to learn a preposition that means with, that really doesn't have a strong distinction between m. And this is the one that I warned you about. We've got the 8 definite direct object marker that's sometimes et. Well, there's a preposition et also. It looks identical, but it's a preposition that means with. Et and im, I don't know how to distinguish them for you because they are used very similarly. They're both used primarily for accompaniment, being with someone spatially or with someone in a relationship or association, that kind of a thing. The bait preposition, when we translate the bait preposition as with, it's a different meaning of with. This is the instrumental with, which would be like, I opened the door with a crowbar. it's what I used as an instrument to accomplish something. So with as an instrument, with as means. So means would be something like he he paid the fee with the money that he had in his wallet. The money in his wallet was the means by which he paid the fee. Another one would be manner. And sometimes we use in instead of with for this, but it would be something like he he endured the lecture with great patience. So that would be another with that would be distinct. With would be the manner in which he endured the lecture. So those get a little bit tricky.
No, that nailed it. I couldn't rip it down to a really simple explanation, but the hammer thing got me. That totally makes sense. Okay, lucky last. For the word rav, meaning much or many, on your Excel spreadsheet you had in brackets rarely, great. I didn't quite understand what you meant by that, like much, many, and great. But what you mean by having it in parenthesis and great in rabbit ears, and just got me confused.
Yeah, I'm just checking the time for my next conference. We still got 15 minutes before I have to go, so we're good. But let's talk about that. So let me pull up that spreadsheet. The reason why I did that is because I think Futato actually gives great as a definition for rav. The problem is the number of times rav appears where it's properly translated as great is relatively rare. It's relatively infrequent. It's much more common for rav to be properly translated as much or many because it's quantity. Great tends to be more quality or size, whereas much and many, that's more quantity than it is physical size. So let me pull up rav here and just
that makes sense. I think in the vocab lesson it did actually mention quantity, so I scribbled that down, which made sense with great, because I think somewhere in scripture it talks about like a great throng of angels or something. It's used in quantity, but it was the fact that we had the rarely there. I thought, well, it makes sense with quantity, but rarely, I don't know. But no, how do you explain it? Makes
yeah,
sense.
when I say rarely there, I don't mean you should translate. You should use the word rarely in your translation. What I mean is it rarely means great. It doesn't frequently mean the word great. Let me pull it back up here where that's at. Was that lesson 8?
Yeah, 9.
Okay, yeah. So one of the problems, like gadol. Gadol is the word that you're usually going to use for great. We also have the word great in English to it can describe a quality. So that was a great meal. But you're going to use tov most likely for that in Hebrew, good or pleasing. So I don't like using great as a translation for rav. One of the reasons why this happens is because sort of the obvious mnemonic, the obvious memory aid for rav is rabbi, and rabbi means great one, but it's Aramaic instead of Hebrew, I think, and you're picking one instance of the word, the root rav, and actually I think that in the more technical lexicons, there's actually 2 different words rav. One of them means a great thing or something like that, and one of them means numerous. But the way I would say it is think of rav as numerous. Don't think of it as much or many in terms of like what it means. You can use much or many as the gloss. You can use it as the word that you put in English. But when it comes to the meaning of the word, think of the meaning numerous. Again, in English, the difference between much and many, it depends on what type of noun you're using. If it's a count noun, something that you can count, then it would be many pencils. But if it's a non-count noun like stress or grief, you don't count grief, it's just a thing, you would say much stress or much grief or something like that. So the difference between these 2 words is an English thing rather than, related to Hebrew. But when I say rarely great, I'm only doing that because I know Futato gives you this word. I would not give you the word great. I'm not giving you every single possible translation of these words. I'm just giving you the most common ones. And if it were up to me, I would not put great in the most common meanings for rav. Since Futato mentions it, I go ahead and add it, but I want you to know that you should almost never in this class translate rav as great, because the sentences you're going to see, great is not the meaning that rav is conveying there. It's almost always conveying numerous.
Awesome. That's exactly what I need to know. So also balancing that between gadol.
Yes.
If you want to say great, use gadol.
Yeah. If you if you're going to put simple ideas with these, rav would be the idea of a lot. Gadol would be the idea of big, I guess. Gadol usually refers to size. Rav usually refers to quantity or amount. So that's kind of the now. You obviously, size, would imply, if you have a large size, that would imply, great volume or something like that. So they are related. It's just they're used for different types of nouns, I guess would be the idea. So, anyways, Any other questions?
Nope, I'm spent.
All right, let's take a look and just see what types of exercises he has here, because we've only got about 10 more minutes, but I'll just highlight. Let me pull up the, by the way, if you guys didn't notice, Bitcoin's creeping up on 55, so get ready to go to the moon. My wife's scoffing at me over here. Where is, let's try modules. Here we go. All right, D. Oh man, light week. D and E. All right. Well, good thing there's not much to cover. Wait, that can't be right because you guys are asking. Oh,
But chapter 9.
you were asking questions about chapter 9. That's right. Okay. So let's see here. Parsing. What did I write? What in the world does this stuff mean? This is all from a previous semester when I got off on a different tangent, so I'm just going to erase those.
We don't have D as one of our exercises this week.
Right. D and E is from the lesson 8 from last week. So in the conferences, I'll usually go over the previous week's Futato exercises. So just looking at these, just more of the same pattern that we talked about before. Again, for me, when I was learning, it was helpful to just count up how many letters do I have. I know that my root's supposed to have 3. So actually, let's look at number 2, because I actually got a question about number 2. I got a question about what's up with this hey prefix? Like, is this some weird form of the definite article or something? What's going on here? I don't understand why we've been learning the Cal perfect conjugation, which is all suffixes. So why do we have a prefix all of a sudden? Okay, well, you may know the answer to that, but we don't have a prefix. This is not the definite article, despite my little rubric of, if you see a word in Hebrew that starts with a hey, think, hey, this might be the definite article. You're looking to confirm that with a hey patak dagesh. There is no hey patak dagesh. There's a hey kametz, which sometimes is the definite article. But in order for hey kametz to be the definite article, it has to be in front of an aleph or an ayin or a resh, and it's not. So this is not the definite article. This is not a prefix at all. This is part of the root. Okay, so the root here, it's not going to let me select, but the root is hey lamed kaf. The reason why that can be confusing is you might see lamed kaf tet and think that this is the root with a hiric suffix. But if you ask yourself, which form of the verb that we've learned uses a hiric yod suffix, the only one that doesn't use just a hiric yod, it uses a tav hiric yod. That's how we know that tav hiric yod is part of the suffix. We take that off, we're left with the root hey lamed kaf. Tav hiric yod indicates Cal perfect 1CS. Hey lamed kaf. That is our root, and so we're done there. But again, the basic kind of process of how many letters am I looking at? Okay, if it's more than 3, then I need to get rid of some. And that means that in the Cal perfect, I've probably got a suffix. So let's start at the end and ask, which verb form uses this particular suffix? And whatever's left is going to be my root. Again, that's going to work great until about lesson number 11. And then we get into weak roots in lesson 14. And I can't remember whether we do 14 in this semester or if that's next semester. I think we start 14 this semester and then 15 will be next semester. But when we get into weak roots, all of a sudden we're going to see verbs that lose letters from the root. So if I can go back to where I was, maybe. When we get into the imperfect, for example, halak will be a weak verb because, oh man, I don't want to confuse you here. Can I get like a, try to find a better verb to work with. Well, let's go with yada, okay? So when we get into the imperfect, yada is a weak verb because Hebrew verbs that start with a yod, there's 2 different categories of those. So in one category, you have Hebrew verbs that start with a yod, and that word has always started with a yod. But then there's a second category where you've got Hebrew verbs that start with a yod, but it hasn't always been a yod. These words used to begin with a vav, and then eventually Hebrew dropped the vav as the first root letter of a verb and replaced it with yod. It switched from a vav to a yod. Well, those 2 categories of verbs do 2 different things when it comes to the imperfect. And what ends up happening with the yod is the yod drops out, so to speak. It disappears. And now you have to figure out what your root is when you're missing one of your root letters. So taking off the suffix and being left with the root, that's only going to work for a certain period of time. But once we get to those weak verbs, we'll talk about another set of questions you can ask to kind of, okay, well, I'm down to 3 letters now, but how do I know these 3 are actually my root instead of maybe I lost a letter and I've got a prefix on here or something, but we'll baby step into that. So what else do we have for lesson 8? It was D and E. So translations, we got 3 minutes, so let's just work through a long one. We'll take number 14 here. So again, 14, we start with et. So we're already, I know as soon as I see et here that I've got my definite direct object. And I'm noting the fact that, oh, wow, I'm starting a sentence with the direct object. That's weird in Hebrew. I shouldn't say it's weird, but it's not typical. So there's probably some sort of fronting or emphasis going on here. So et, I don't need to translate because, again, it's not really a word. It's more of it's closer to a punctuation mark. But then I've got ha milchamot. I see a hey, I think, hey, this might be the definite article. I confirm that with hey patak dagesh. If I take that off, I should be left with a Hebrew word that's familiar. Milchamot is kind of familiar. It's the feminine plural form of milchama. Milchama means battle. So the feminine plural form would be translated as battles. I remember I had the definite article, so I'm going to gloss this word as the battles. Got that word done. I note that it's a noun, so I'm going to have to figure out what it's doing in the sentence, but et has already answered that. It is the direct object. Fully parsed, fully analyzed that word, I can move on to the next word. Shama'u. All right, well, shama'u, if it doesn't jump out at you as a verb, I'm trying to think of how you could come to the conclusion that it's a verb. When you see a shuruk on the end of a word, that frequently happens with verbs, but you may not always see a shuruk here. As you look at this, if it doesn't look familiar to you at all, it's probably a good idea to consider the fact that it might be a verb. All right, well, so far we've only learned the cal perfect. In the cal perfect, we have suffixes attached to our root. So somewhere in here is a root with a suffix. The Hebrew verbal root has 3 letters. I have 4. So if I have a root and a suffix, the 4th letter must be the suffix, and the 3 letters at the beginning must be the root. Shema, in the cal perfect lexical form, means he heard, or he listened to, or he obeyed. But shama'u, this is the cal perfect 3CP form. So this would be they heard. And then I've got hamish pachot. I've got a hey at the beginning, so hey, this is probably my definite article. Patak dagesh confirms that. I take this off. Mishpachot is the feminine plural form of mishpacha, which means family or clan. So here I have the families. Now I don't have a definite direct object marker here, which tells me it's not a definite direct object. What other function could this noun have in the sentence? The only other function we've learned about so far is the subject, and then this week we're now learning about prepositions, so it could be the object of a preposition, but we don't have a preposition here. So this must be my subject. Let's check, does it agree with the verb in gender and number? The verb is common plural, which means it can take a masculine plural or feminine plural subject. My hamish pachot is feminine plural, therefore it does agree. And so now I'm done with phase 1, stage 1 of the translation, the Hebrew analysis of the words. Now I go into stage 2, which is how would English build this sentence? So English, what do you want first in your sentence? English wants the subject first. So I have to come back here, I have to say, which one was my subject again? Direct object, verb, subject, hamish pachot. We decided that means the families or the clans. So I'm going to take that, bring it back over to English. This is my subject, the families. English, what do you want after the families? Well, I want the verb. Okay, go back here, direct object, verb, subject. Here's my verb. We decided this means they heard, or they listened to, or they obeyed. So because I have a subject, the families, I don't need the pronoun they. I'm just going to bring heard over. The families heard. English, what do you want after the verb? Give me the direct object. All right, direct object is hamilchamot, the battles. So I bring the battles over. The families heard the battles. And I'm done. I can put my period there. But Futato, crazy Futato, he's going to clarify for you so that you aren't confused at all. The families heard the battles, not the animals. The only reason he's doing this is because the direct object was fronted for emphasis, as if to say, what the families heard was the battles, not something else. But that's basically it. All right, we are now 3 minutes over. So unless you have any other questions, we'll go ahead and shut it down, and I'll jump into my next one. But if anything does come up, feel free to email me. All right, we'll see you guys.